Well, greetings, citations, everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's John Campea, and this is an open forum, all spoiler discussion of the brand new Sony movie, Venom. Listen, in case the title didn't give it all away, understand this. We are going to be talking openly about the movie Venom. We're going to be talking frankly about the movie Venom, and we are going to be talking very spoilery about the movie Venom. If you have not seen Venom, and you don't want to know anything that happens in the movie Venom, click away from this video now, add this to your save for watch later list or your favorites list, whatever, so you can come back and watch it later. But you've been warned, we're going to talk big, openly, and spoilery about Venom. Now, we got a whole bunch of live questions. Mostly this is what today's going to be, taking the live questions, talking about Venom. But I wanted to give a couple of thoughts on Venom here first. I believed Sony was hiding this movie, and they were. They were hiding it. I think they understood, they knew they had a movie that a lot of the critics would not like, and probably a movie that a lot of fans wouldn't like. And so they hid it. Sure enough, the critic reviews start coming out for it, and about 1 out of every 3 critics liked it. Like, it's got I think the last I checked, it's got a 31%, so about 1 out of every 3. About 2 out of every 3 didn't like it. A number of people in the early audiences didn't like it either. So I was expecting to not like it at all. And I have to say, I went in to watch it with Ray. Me and Ray went in to watch it. And we came out and we went, you know, that wasn't that bad. That was okay. That had some pretty damn good moments. Some bad things, but had some pretty good moments. Then I went to go see it again the next day with my wife, because my wife hadn't seen it. And she had quite a good time, and I liked it even a little bit more. I still don't think it's a great movie. Don't get me wrong. I don't think Venom's great. But it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And I'll tell you this, it actually irritated me a little bit more watching it a second time and liking it a little bit more the second time actually irritated me, because this is a movie that's okay and maybe even pretty good. But in watching it, especially a second time, you could really tell this could have been a great movie. It could have been a great movie with a couple of very easy, maybe not easy, but obvious things they should have and could have fixed. This could not have just been a pretty good movie. This could have been a great movie. Because the most important thing to me going into Venom, the 2 things they absolutely had to nail was, 1, nail Venom. Just get Venom, get him to look good, get him to do some really good action, all that kind of stuff. Number 2, you have to really make the dynamic between Eddie and Venom really work. And you got to make that sing. And if you do those 2 things, this movie will work. And after seeing Venom 2 times, I can tell you that I say they did those 2 things. They did the most 2 important things. But they botched a lot of other things they easily could have nailed as well. And if they got those other things, we wouldn't just be talking about a pretty good, pretty entertaining Venom movie. We would have been talking about a great Venom movie. And I mentioned this in my initial review after I saw the movie for the first time, but let me highlight again a couple of the big things I think they could have fixed. Number 1, the first act of this film drags way too much. Once you get to Venom and Eddie, the movie sings. But it drags too much in that first act getting to Eddie and Venom. Especially watching the movie a second time, you could pick out a number of scenes in that first act. They're like, this movie could have done without this scene, and it could have done without that scene, and that scene could have been half the length, and you could have accomplished what you accomplished in that scene in this other scene, therefore eliminating the need for that. You just could have had a tighter, more robust feeling, better paced film, especially in that first act. Because that first act did not feel good at all. And I have a feeling that it's the first act of Venom that probably lost a lot of people. I felt the same way about Christopher Robin, the Disney film. I think the reason you got a number of negative reviews out of Christopher Robin was because of that first act. It is a bad first act. And a lot of times, if you lose the audience early, it's very difficult to get them back on board later down the line with the movie. And that's not the audience's fault, that's the movie's fault. So if you lose the audience early, it can be very, very difficult to get them back on board. And I would like to propose that Venom loses a number of people in the audience, be they critics or regular average moviegoers. I think Venom loses some people in that first act because it's a rough first act to get through. It is. It's rough to get through. Couple of highlight moments, but not enough to make up for it. You know what I'm saying? Now, once you get to the end of the first act and you get into the second act and you get Eddie and Venom together, then the movie really starts to take off. But I just feel like this movie will lose a lot of people in that first act. And that is not the audience's fault. That is the movie's fault. And I think they could have done something better there. The second thing I really think they could have and should have done better was their villain. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about the Riot versus Venom fight at the end. I'm talking about Drake. Carlton Drake. That, to me, simply did not work. It's unfortunate because you have Riz Ahmed in the role, who's a terrific actor, and you have him in this position with the Life Foundation that you could do a really intriguing villain. But the motivation behind Drake was so convoluted. It's like, well, wait a minute, how did you know there were symbiote life forms on an asteroid, and how did you know to pick them up and bring them back to Earth? Because you knew that merging alien and human DNA would allow humans to live in outer space. And really, that's his big plan for saving the human race, is to make it so we can live in outer space? That's the plan? I mean, I just never got on board with it. I never got on board with it. And because if you can't get on board with the motivations of the villain, it's tough to get on board with the villain. You know what I'm saying? I had an easier time with Riot than I did with Carlton Drake. Much easier time with Riot than I did with Drake. So I think right off the bat, if Venom could have nailed those two things, if they could have given us a better paced, more compact, more effective, and more meaningful first act, and then if they could have done a little bit more work on their main antagonist in Drake, then you couple those elements with the Venom character itself and the Eddie and Venom dynamic, we wouldn't be talking about a movie that's pretty good. We would have been talking about a movie that's great. To me, it dropped the ball in those circumstances. So we're not talking about a movie that's great. But you know what? Also, we're not talking about. We're not talking about a movie that's a dud. We're not talking about a movie that's a dud. And I expected this, especially after Sony started hiding the film from people. I was going into it not having any high hopes. I heard some people that I respect really didn't like the film, blah, blah, blah. I was expecting a dud. So imagine my surprise when I go in and go, that's not bad. There are some real highlight moments in this film. And by the end of it, I was engaged and I was entertained. You know, this is far better than X-Men Apocalypse and far better than, a number of other films that put out kind of, or, Assassin's Creed or things like that. These adventure, a little bit of sci-fi worked in there. It worked on a number of levels, mainly because of Venom and then the dynamic between Venom and Eddie. Tom Hardy makes this movie work. Tom Hardy steps in there with the help of the director, obviously, and he grabs this movie and he says, I am not going to let this movie not work. And I feel like Tom Hardy stepped in there, grabbed this movie by the throat and said, to hell with it, and pulled a Thanos. I'll do it myself. And he just makes it work because he is also the voice of Venom. And just the way they did it and the timing of the jokes is very good. And you know what? I'm sorry. I know a lot of people get mad at me when I say I enjoy a film that most other people don't enjoy. To hell with it. I don't care. I enjoyed Venom. Didn't love it. Didn't jump out of my seat about it. Not saying it's great. I'm not saying everybody needs to rush out and see it. But to hell with it. I enjoyed Venom. I think it's an enjoyable film. And it is crazy that the two times I saw this movie, at the end of both, now everybody's audience that you see the movie with will be different, all right? Everybody's audience will be different. I'm just telling you that the two audiences I saw Venom with, when the credits started to roll, there was more than enthusiastic applause from the audience. So the audiences seem to be liking it. The fans seem to like it. When I put up my first tweet, I remember I came out of seeing Venom for the first time, and I tweeted out, my simple tweet was just this: Venom, ... isn't awful. Had more upside than I was expecting. Now, when I put that tweet out, I was fully expecting this backlash of negative, hate on me. Oh, of course, Campea, you'd like that. You like Batman versus Superman, like some idiotic, moronic spew like that, right? I was expecting a ton of that. Oh my God, it was all affirmative, responses I got from people, people saying, yeah, I kind of liked it too. I was just kind of surprised by it. But anyway, that's enough from me. Let's hear from you guys now. Let's talk about Venom. What are your thoughts about Venom? What worked for you about Venom? What didn't work for you with Venom? What are some question marks you had about the film? Let's go into it right now as a bunch of movie friends here and talk about it. So we're going to get things started off here with Bombus 467, who writes, Transformers, Fast and Furious, Venom. I'll be honest with you, Bombus, I'm sorry, I have no idea what it is you're asking. Ben Hayusa writes, won't be part of this, though, because I won't be seeing it till an hour later on tonight. After hearing it's not completely awful, I'm looking forward to watching it to it. It's funny that, I mean, that's not exactly high praise, right? Saying, hey, that movie's not completely awful. I mean, that's not the high praise you're looking for. But to be fair, it's true. It's not completely awful and has a bunch of fun in it. So anyway, I hope you have a good time with it, Ben. All right, Ben Sultan writes, I thought the movie was okay, but I didn't like the I think you mean Carlton, Drake character. I thought is one of the weaker ones in the film. I completely agree with you, Ben. Completely agree. And it is too bad because you got Riz Ahmed in there who can do a lot with a character. Riz Ahmed can do a lot with him if you give him the tools and if you give him the character. And you give him the dialogue, he'll make a lot work. And again, I went over all the reasons why the character, I mean, I couldn't buy into the motivation. And if I can't buy into the villain's motivation, then I can't buy into the villain. And on that level, it didn't work for me. I liked Riot, but not so much the Carlton Drake character. And that's a weakness in the script. And I think there are a number of problems in this movie that can all completely be attributed to the script, unfortunately. Let's see. Ben Rayner writes, loved it, bro. Loved it. Bromance between Eddie and Venom was perfect. I mean, right there, that really is the main strength of this film. And I think most people who saw Venom, even people who don't like the movie, will probably agree that the biggest thing that works in the movie, the best part about this movie, is the dynamic between Eddie and Venom. I've even seen a number of negative reviews of Venom that said, but hey, you know, the dynamic between Eddie and Venom really worked. I mean, most people seem to agree with that, and I'm totally on board with you on that, Ben. Static Space Sean writes, loved the movie. Hardy was the glue that held the film together. For me, his positives outweighed all the negatives. Why the audience critic disconnect? I think it's because, look, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it is a very imperfect film. And this is coming from a guy that I enjoyed it. I liked Venom. But it is a very imperfect film with some very big glaring weaknesses and a very shaky first act that can lose a lot of people very quickly and not get them back on board later on in the film. And so I'll tell you what, I came out of that. This is one of those movies that I came out of going, I enjoyed it, but yeah, man, I can't argue with anybody who didn't enjoy it. There are mistakes in Venom. There are easily avoidable mistakes. There are problems in this movie. And I can totally see why, for one film fan, that the positives of this movie did not outweigh all the negatives. For me, the positives did outweigh the negatives, but I could totally see it the other way too. And so on that level, look, it's not like there's a whole bunch of us running around saying, Venom's awesome. I don't hear anybody running around yelling Venom is awesome. At least a very tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. A lot of us who are liking Venom, even those of us who are liking are going, well, you know, it's got its problems. And it does. It has some massive problems. And I think therein lies why you're going to see some disconnect. I think the audience, the average film-going audience can quite often be more forgiving of a lot of problems in a movie than critics will be. And that's understandable. Critics see a lot more films, so they become a little bit less forgiving for some of the big glaring weaknesses. Because, like I said, even those of us who like Venom will acknowledge, yep, some big glaring problems in Venom. There really are. So I think that probably has a lot to do with the separation there a little bit. Ben Rayner writes, Venom, jump, cut to the elevator button, pussy. Best laugh in the theater both times I saw it. And that was a very well-written joke that would have fallen flat if it wasn't for perfect editing. The editing of that joke had to be perfect. The timing had to be right down to the split second of jump, cut, elevator button, bing, voice, pussy. If you don't execute that perfect. It's like a football play. Quick visual and audible jokes like that are a lot like football plays. You can draw them up perfectly. If you don't execute them perfectly, they can fall flat. That pussy joke was a joke that could have fallen flat very easy. But it was well written, perfectly edited, perfect timing, and both audiences that I saw it with, including me, myself personally, that joke crushed it. I love, and you know what? Almost no other moment in the movie embodies the relationship between Eddie and Venom as that one gag. Jump, click, bing, pussy. Like if that right there in a 2-second span completely embodied the relationship between Eddie and Venom. I loved it. It was perfectly executed. Great gag. Still my favorite gag in the movie. Ben follows up with, I'll say it, one of my favorite origin movies. You know, and for an origin movie where you have right now an audience that more and more is asking Hollywood to move away from origin stories. Understandably so. We've been inundated with origin stories. Venom goes in there and does an origin story and does it pretty well. Again, I'm not going to say it's one of my favorite origin stories because it's hard to blow the first act of the film and say it's a great origin story. This could have been, to me, a fantastic origin story if they hadn't botched the first act. And I'm sorry, but to me, they botched the first act. That first act was totally a botch. And I think they could have done it a lot better, in which case I'd probably feel a little bit more positively about it as an origin film. But hey, it is what it is. Cody Carroll writes, I wish Riot was a different color at the end fight. You know what? I've heard a couple of people say that, Cody. I'm going to say, to me, I had no problems distinguishing between Riot and Venom. I thought Riot's gray was visually different enough from Venom's pure deep black that and not to mention the design of the face and all that kind of stuff and the bulk of the character. You're not alone, Cody. I've heard other people mention that they probably would have appreciated it if Riot's color had been a little bit more different from Venom's. All I can say is that as an audience member, I honestly had no trouble. I had no trouble distinguishing between the two characters in the last fight. But that was my experience. That doesn't mean it was your experience. But all I can do is tell you what my experience was. Let's see here. Mitchell Chandler writes, when Venom said he changed because of Eddie, I was honestly confused. Eddie didn't do anything to change Venom's mind. The last scene lost impact for me. See, I disagree with you on that. See, because to me, seeing Eddie doing things to protect the people he loves, and remember, Venom's in his head too. The longer he's in Eddie's body, the more he knows Eddie. And that's how I took it. It wasn't, to me, at least, again, I'm only speaking for me as an audience member who was sitting there watching the film. When Venom said that line to Eddie, well, it's hard saying Venom and Eddie. Really, it's Eddie and the symbiote, and together they are Venom. But whatever. They say the symbiote's name is Venom, but anyway. When the symbiote says that to Eddie, the way I saw that was, I didn't interpret that as him saying, this one specific thing you did, Eddie, in this adventure is what changed my mind, but rather a more total worldview, if you will, of Eddie's mind and getting to know him as a person is what did it. So, and maybe I'm misinterpreting that. I might completely be misinterpreting that. But again, all I can say is, as I'm an audience member sitting there watching the film, that's how my mind interpreted it immediately. But I mean, remember, Venom also watched Eddie, even though like these armed police dudes are trying to kill him. Remember, as he's coming out of the network's office, and you know all those 20 armed police guys are there trying to kill him. Venom is watching Eddie fighting to fight off these guys, but also fighting to not unnecessarily kill these guys. Like, he's fighting them to not die, but he's also fighting with Venom to not hurt these people too much. To me, that says an awful lot about Eddie, and it says an awful lot, maybe to Venom, about humanity, right? So, to me, there are individual circumstances in the movie that could change Venom's mind. But again, to me, the bigger picture was that I think it was just Eddie or Venom getting to know Eddie the longer he's in him. So that's the way I took it, but maybe I'm misinterpreting it. Technovine writes, there will be carnage. I like that scene. I'm curious to see how Cletus will get his symbiote or if he'll fight Venom with Spidey in tow. I'm going to tell you what. I'll be honest with you. I read a lot of reviews before seeing the movie. And even the negative ones were saying the mid-credits scene is great. Even the negative reviews were saying the mid-credits scene is great. I didn't care all that much for the mid-credits scene, to be honest. To be completely honest with you, I didn't care for it much. I didn't think it was like, okay, well, there's Cletus Cassidy. Whoop-de-doo. Nothing happens. Ooh, he says the word carnage. Big deal. I mean, to me, nothing really happened. I think had they used the mid-credits scene to show Cletus getting a scrape of Venom's symbiote, if they showed something, maybe, but okay, he's talking to Cletus, and Cletus says, there's going to be carnage. Now, everybody's loving that line. To me, it was very cheap fan service. To me, Woody Harrelson saying, then when I get out, there's going to be carnage. To me, that's the equivalent of a band playing in Houston going, how you doing, Houston? I mean, it's a cheap pop. But I get it. Everybody else loved the mid-credit scene except me. I'll be the wet blanket. I didn't care for the mid-credit scene. I thought it was a wasted opportunity, to be honest with you. But you're not alone, Technovine. Everybody else loves the scene. Everybody else loves it. So you're in good company. I'm in the minority on this one. All right. Murray Reich writes, the second end credit scene with the animated Spider-Man movie was so damn funny. I think it's a brilliant marketing tool that will give it some boost. Look, I'll tell you what. I told you the second time I saw the movie, I saw it with my wife, Ann. My wife knew nothing about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. She saw that second end credit scene with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse stuff. It's one of her most anticipated movies for the rest of the year now. Now she is dying to see this movie. All based on that one post-credit scene. So it was a good move. I would almost suggest it should have been the mid-credit scene so you would have had more people. Because I don't know what your experience was like with your audience, guys. But in my audience, the mid-credit scene happened. Okay, so wait a minute. The movie ends. A few people leave. Most people know, stick around for the mid-credit scene. So a lot of people stay behind. Then the mid-credit scene plays, and then 80% of the theater leaves. So by the time they get to the end credit scene, there's only about 10% of the people were left in the theater, including me and my wife, Ann, and Ann loved it. Now she can't wait to see. I would almost suggest they should have put the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse post-credit scene in the mid-credit spot and moved the there'll be carnage thing to the end because it didn't mean anything anyway. So I think they would have gotten a lot more mileage for their dollar if they had put that Spider-Verse thing in the mid-credit scene. I think they would have gotten more effect out of it. Let's see. Curtis Lopez writes, I thought the movie was average, yet kind of stupid in a somewhat entertaining way. You know what, Curtis? I think you just nailed how a lot of people feel about Venom. I thought the movie was average, yet kind of stupid in a somewhat entertaining way. I think you just, seriously, I think you just encapsulated how a lot of people feel about that movie. A lot of big, obvious, glaring weaknesses. A lot of things they did not do well and did not do right. But there is a joy in it. There's an entertainment in it. When you're cheering for the villain and you're laughing along with it, you're entertained. And whereas they failed at a lot of things, they succeeded in that. And I think that's why you're getting a lot of people walking out of theaters going, I had a good time. I had a good time. And I think that's exactly why you're getting that reaction from people. Let's see. Snake Jerusalem writes, I think Venom doesn't get enough credit for focusing on telling a single story of its own and avoiding the temptation of too much universe building. Snake, you're completely right, and I'll bring it home even more. Sony learned their lesson from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. If there is any other takeaway from Venom, it is that Sony clearly learned that lesson from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, while not a complete train wreck of a movie, is one of the greatest examples ever of the sin of failing to focus on your movie and instead focusing on universe building and what your future movies will be. I don't think there has ever been a movie that has been more guilty of that than The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Venom was Sony basically saying, guys, we listened and we learned, and we will not make that mistake again. And that's why I think you're completely right, Snake. We go into Venom, there is no universe building whatsoever. They focused on telling their one story. And then if we're successful, we'll tell another one. But let's focus on the story. And the only element of universe building they save for the post-credits scene. There's going to be carnage. That was it. They saved it for a little bit in the post-credits scene. Everything else was completely focused on this movie. That is a huge step forward for Sony. And I think you're right, Snake. I don't think Sony's getting the credit they deserve for learning that lesson. Look, they made other mistakes with Venom. They did. Let's not pretend they didn't make other mistakes. They did. But that was their most egregious sin with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and they clearly learned their lesson, and they were clearly committed to staying focused on this movie. And I think that's maybe why it kind of worked for a lot of people. Great observation, Snake. All right. I'm upset, writes. Over, under 15%. Spidey is in a Venom 2. I'm going to take the under on 15% of that. I think they are going, look, this movie just made $80 million opening weekend. Blowing past all the expectations, setting this movie well on the way to being more than profitable. This movie is going to get a sequel. And they're going to go into development on their sequel before Spider-Man Far From Home comes out in theaters. I'm going to tell you that right now. They will be working on Venom 2 prior to Spider-Man Far From Home hitting theaters. I'm going to take the under 15% that Spidey will be in Venom 2. Look, I've said this too. I said the only danger of Spider-Man being pulled out of the MCU was if Venom flopped. If Venom flopped, then you were going to see Sony go, well, we can't make a superhero universe without Spider-Man. And every Spider-Man movie we make makes over $700 million. So, yoink, they're going to pull Spider-Man out of the MCU and bring him back into Sony. And I get these people telling me, no, John, MCU wouldn't let them do that. Marvel has no say in it. Sony owns the rights to Spider-Man. They have simply been allowing the MCU to have Spider-Man in the MCU on a temporary deal that expires after Spider-Man Far From Home. Marvel doesn't get a vote. Marvel doesn't get a say. And I've said from the beginning, if Venom flops, Sony's going to pluck him out of the MCU and bring him back to Sony. Because they can't make a cinematic universe movie work without Spider-Man. But guess what? With an $80 million opening weekend, beating the previous opening weekend box office record for the month of October by more than $20 million, it is safe to say we're going to get a Venom 2. And it is safe to say I now believe Sony's going to feel comfortable extending their deal with Marvel and allowing Spider-Man to stay in the MCU longer. So this is good news for everybody. So I will take the under on 15% that Spider-Man's going to be in Venom 2. He's going to stay in the MCU. Curtis Lopez writes, some of the dialogue was corny. Yep. Like when Venom and Eddie have that bicker at the end about calling Venom a parasite. Felt like the ending to a sitcom. Yes, but to be fair, Curtis, they set up the dynamic between the two of them like an Odd Couple sitcom a little bit, did they not? Apologize. I kind of got a kick out. You know, my wife, you remember I said the pussy line is the funniest line in the movie. My wife, Anne, to her, by far, the funniest line in the movie that she has repeated about 10 times today and made her laugh the hardest was, so what's it going to be tonight? Tater tots and chocolate. That, I don't know why. That killed Anne. Completely slayed her. She laughed herself stupid at that, and she's been repeating that line all day. We've been walking the dogs earlier, and all of a sudden, tater tots and chocolate. And like, she'll just say it out loud, right? And then she'll start giggling when she says it. To her, that was the best thing of the movie. I do not think you're wrong, Curtis, in your observation that it felt a little sitcom-y, but I think that was happening long before that end scene. I think there was a very sitcom-y element to this, and oddly enough, it kind of worked. But anyway, that's just the way I felt about it at any rate. Murray Reich writes, a lot of funny moments with Venom and Eddie, especially when Venom calls him a pussy for not jumping. Again, so well executed, so well edited, so well written. For me, it was the highlight joke of the movie. I laughed myself stupid at that. I really did. I thought it was great. Curtis follows up. Sorry about Venom. Such a weird line by Michelle. No, I thought it was a perfectly appropriate line, actually. Like, she understood. Remember, by the time you got to that scene in the movie, Annie, at that point, then understood that Venom wants to save Eddie. She understood that dynamic. And having possessed the Venom symbiote for a short period of time, she understood what it was and that the power that gave. For then Eddie to lose that half of him would have been hard and would have been difficult, especially when Venom just went there to save his life out of the Life Foundation. So I'm going to disagree with you on that one, Curtis. I thought her saying, I'm sorry about Venom. I thought that was a completely appropriate line that the character would have said in that situation. Yeah, so I'll disagree. That doesn't mean you're wrong and that I'm right. I'm just saying I just happen to disagree. That's all. Curtis follows up. Also, Venom thinks himself a loser. Okay, that's odd. Again, I thought that was great. My audience laughed crazy when he said that. And it is weird to hear him say that, but when you see him next to Riot, okay, yeah, I could get why maybe he thinks he's a little bit of a loser on his own world. But more important than that, it was a really funny line that made the audience, like, again, maybe your audience had a different reaction. But the two audiences I saw it with got a big reaction out of that. For the audiences I saw it with. Let's see, where are we? Curtis also follows up with, when Woody Harrelson appears, where did it go? Oh yeah, when Woody Harrelson appears with his red wig, I sang, the sun will come out tomorrow. Oh yeah, I gotta say, I thought the wig looked weird. I get it. I understand, John. I get it. But I will say, you know what? I didn't want to sing The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow. All I thought about was Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons. I don't know why. I saw that wig and I'm just like, Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons. He's going to get out and kill Bart. Look out, Bart. Like, that's what I thought. So that wig, just another reason why I didn't like the post-credit scene myself. Murray Reich writes, where are we here? There we go. The one thing that bothered me a lot from Venom was the turd in the wind moment was placed at the end of the film. Well, the turd in the wind moment was always at the end of the film. Your problem isn't with where it's in the film. Your problem was with that it was used in the marketing. Because that moment was always at the end of the film. They just happened to decide to take that and use it in the marketing. That's not something you can blame the movie for. That's a disconnect between the marketing and the movie itself. That's a marketing issue, for sure. But I don't know. It worked for me. I'll tell you what. I didn't know how I felt about when I saw that scene in the trailers. You'd be this armless, legless, faceless thing like a turd in the wind. I didn't hate it. Some moments I really liked it, and some moments I thought it was... The bottom line is I didn't know how I felt about that line. But in context in the movie, with the relationship between Eddie and Venom having grown and developed to the point that it was at, it worked for me in the movie. When he says that line at the end, it worked for me in the movie. And I especially appreciate that he decided, hell with it, I'm going to eat you anyway. And he eats the guy at the end. He goes ahead and eats him at the end. He doesn't eat his arms and legs and face and sends him out like a turd in the wind. No, he just eats him. It's like, and for me, seeing that in context just worked for me. It worked for me better in context. Let's see. Jeremy Ingalls writes, my theater was packed and clapped at the end. Yeah, again, I was surprised. Well, I was surprised the whole way through the first time I saw the movie that the audience was giving a lot of laughs and seemed to be enjoying themselves. Then the movie ended and big applause at the end. Big applause. And then it happened again with my second screening. And I've been having a lot of people tweet me and saying, hey, John, I had the same experience in my theater. The audiences seem to be having a good time with it. So there you go. Jedi Lori writes, bad reviews or not, I loved this movie. Not every movie has to be Shakespeare. I was cracking up the whole time and enjoyed myself immensely. I mean, the thing here's the thing, Jedi Lori, though. Not every movie has to be Shakespeare. No. But you still want to be good. There are a lot of movies that aren't Shakespeare that are still good. There are a lot of movies that aren't Shakespeare that are just crap. And I know this isn't what you're doing, but I oftentimes hear film fans make excuses for films they like, going, well, not everything has to be Shakespeare. Well, I know it doesn't have to be Shakespeare, but it still has to be good. For me, Venom executed on the two most important things, Venom himself and the dynamic between Eddie and Venom. It worked on those levels, and because it worked on those two levels, and those were the two most important things, the movie works. But a lot of times, you get movies that don't have to be Shakespeare, but they don't execute on those levels, and they fail on those levels, and they're just crap. I mean, it's all subjective, but I mean, to me, they're just crap. Yes, Venom wasn't Shakespeare. That doesn't mean you give it a pass if it sucks, right? You don't give this movie a pass if it sucks. I give it a pass because it hit the things it needed to hit. It dropped the ball on a number of plays. It blew some of the things that should have been fairly easy. But on the most important parts, the most important elements, they seem to nail those elements. And for me, that makes me give this movie a pass. And have a good time and enjoy myself. Even though, as you point out, it was certainly no Shakespeare. Let's see. Murray Reich writes, while some scenes with Venom killing are violent, many of them happen so fast that they either get blurred off screen in the background. It was missing R. I disagree. Look, I just don't think all I need to know is that, oh, that guy's dead. I didn't need to see his head be ripped off his neck. That wouldn't, to me, again, this is just my personal stuff. That doesn't make the movie better. It doesn't make it worse if they put it in, but it doesn't make the movie better. It doesn't make the movie a better film. Look, I know Venom just bit that guy's head off. I didn't actually have to see the bone and the tendon and the muscles ripping and separating the head from the shoulders. I didn't need to see that in order to get it. Venom just bit that dude's head off. To me, that doesn't make the movie better. It just doesn't. But again, that's a personal preference. That's a personal sensibility. Look, if they had shown the heads being ripped off, it doesn't make the first act any better of a first act. It was a bad first act. If they showed Venom biting the dude's head off and you see all the blood splatter all over the place, that doesn't make Carlton Drake a better villain. Carlton Drake was still a bad villain. It doesn't make the movie better. Would it have made the movie worse to have that? No, I don't think so either. I think they could have done that. It's a creative choice. But I just don't see how doing that would have benefited the movie enough to justify giving it an R. You know what I'm saying? Like if there were really important things that should have happened in this movie that could only be done within the context of an R-rated film, then that justifies the R. You go for it and you do it. Like Deadpool. You can't make Deadpool the way it was made without doing it R. You just couldn't. But Venom, you were able to do Venom with a lot of carnage, no pun intended, a lot of carnage, a lot of violence, and a big body count. And you were able to do it within the confines of a PG-13. And I got to say, for me, Murray, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that agree with you on this. I'm sure there's going to be many people that agree with you. For me, it did not suffer from the PG-13. To me, it worked just fine as the PG-13. As a matter of fact, there are some things that may have been elevated by the PG-13 than anything else. Look, because here's the thing, too. One of the reasons I think that joke, the pussy joke, works so well, honestly, if Venom had been dropping F-bombs through the whole film, pussy, fuck, pussy, shit, fuck, pussy, blah, 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 if they had been doing that through the whole film, that joke wouldn't have worked nearly as well. It just wouldn't have worked nearly as well. But it comes out of nowhere, right? It comes out of absolute nowhere, pussy. And then you all just start laughing our heads off, right? So I would almost argue that this was a movie that benefited, understanding its DNA, it benefited from the PG-13 more than it would have from the R. Again, that's just my opinion on that, and my mind could change. And I think, Murray, you're going to find a lot of people to probably agree with you on that, but that's just kind of how I feel about it. All right. Leo Milmet writes, is it true that the final battle is hard to see because it's at night and not lit well? Didn't see Venom, but don't care about it, so spoil away. But I find it funny that such a major film could be so lazy. Well, number one, that's not a laziness issue. That's not. There was a lot of work and effort that gets put into doing it the way it's done. It is not an issue of being lazy whatsoever. To me, it worked. Like I said, I cannot speak for everybody else. All I know that is for me as an audience member watching the fight between Riot and Venom, it worked. I was able to understand what was happening going on. If anything, the one problem I had with the fight at the end was some of the editing was too rapid. Some of the cuts were too quick. Other than that, I personally had no problem distinguishing Venom from Riot. I had no problems distinguishing what was happening in the fight. I always knew who was where and what was going on. There were a couple of moments of over rapid editing, but aside from that, yeah, it worked for me. I understand there are some people it didn't work for, all respect, but for me it worked, and that's all I can only speak to my experience, of course. Leo follows it up with, then again, I also hear about it having super extreme continuity issues. So how lazy is this movie? Is it editing as choppy and as lazy as I heard? You use that word lazy. This is not a lazy movie by any definition. And the fault and the problems with this movie, and there are faults and problems with this movie, none of them can be chopped up to laziness. Not at all. Super extreme continuity issues? Nope. I think it has logic problems, but I don't think it has any continuity issues. At least not off the top of my head. And look, if I'm an average moviegoer and I walk out of the theater and there's nothing jumping out at me, how big of a continuity error could it have been if you're not even thinking about it when you're walking out of the theater? So I honestly don't think there are problems with this film. Continuity problems? I really don't think so. Murray follows up with, did you lose your appetite the moment when Eddie started eating garbage scraps? Dude, I thought when he was starting munching on the frozen food, I thought, oh, that's disgusting. When he goes into the garbage and not just pulls out any garbage food like pasta or something, he pulls out chicken that's been sitting overnight in the garbage. Oh man, if the effect they want on the audience to be one of revulsion, they totally nailed it. Because yes, Murray, I, along with a lot of other people, completely lost my appetite at that scene. Completely lost my appetite when he starts pulling out that chicken, which made it all the more kind of like, yeah, when he runs to the bathroom, starts puking it up. I mean, it's like, oh, that was so gross. That was so gross. Let's see. Mitchell Chandler writes, at the end, all I could hear was Deadpool saying, big CGI fight coming up. Overall, Venom was worth seeing. Looking forward to future installments. Yeah. Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. You could totally hear Venom or Deadpool's voice saying, big CGI fight. And there you go. But yeah, bottom line, at the end of it, it's a movie worth seeing. It's not going to be your favorite comic book movie of the year. It's not going to be a movie you're talking about 5 years from now. All that kind of stuff. And it has its problems. But is it worth seeing? I would suggest it is. I would suggest it's worth seeing because there's enough entertainment. Now, everybody's mileage will vary. All film is subjective. You may see it and hate it. There are other people out there who saw it and hated it. Hey, that's film, man. But I think it's definitely a movie worth seeing, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do next. Michael West writes, and go to the forest to the Life Foundation didn't make no sense. Oh, sure it did. Also, when the symbiote got hold of her, she should be dead, right? Because you have to have perfect match to survive. No, not necessarily. Two things. One, you're assuming, your statement is assuming a couple things, Michael. Assumption number one, you're assuming that Michelle and the symbiote merged at the hospital. You're assuming that. Assumption number two, you're assuming that they then went from the hospital and made a beeline to the forest. That's the second assumption. As an audience member sitting there, my interpretation of it was, when I was watching the movie, was she got there, heard the ruckus, started following the ruckus, and came across, with Eddie being led out into the woods. My other thing that I just assumed watching the movie was, at that point, the symbiote and her merged just for that 1 minute so she could take out the guys, and then the symbiote merged back with Eddie. Remember, even with some of the guys that took a symbiote, they still lasted for a minute or two. Even that one guy who survived the symbiosis, but then eventually it took about a day or two that his organs started to shut down and all that kind of stuff, right? So if Annie took on the host at the last second just so Venom could take out all those dudes threatening Eddie, it actually makes perfect sense. Again, that's just what went through my head as I was watching the movie. I think for it to be a problem, you'd have to go with a couple of big assumptions. Assumption number one, that Michelle Williams' character merged with the symbiote at the hospital. And assumption number two, she just made a beeline from the hospital to the woods. I'm suggesting she went to the Life Foundation, saw what was going down, followed them out into the woods at that point, then merged with the symbiote who took out the guys. That's how I interpreted it. I could be wrong, but that's just kind of how I saw it when I saw the movie for the first time. But that's just me. I could be wrong, and that could be a problem. Logic-wise, that would be a problem. But that's just how my head kind of put the pieces together when I was watching it. Let's see. Michael follows it up with, I didn't care for Michelle's character. There was no point for her in the movie. Oh, I disagree. Why can't Eddie Brock have no girlfriend or had an ex-girlfriend? I think because the Annie character was his anchor to life, really. She became the Annie character was the living representation of what he lost. It wasn't his job that was the big representation of what he lost in his life. He didn't care about the job anymore, per se. Annie was the representation of what he lost from his life. And ultimately, his main thing for wanting to save the world. And on top of that, it's his connection with her that led him to also the stuff with Dan, understanding who he is, all that kind of stuff, needing help at the end. Look, there are a lot of comic book movies. You guys have heard me complain about this a lot with a lot of different comic book movies with the love interest and it didn't make any sense, blah, blah, blah. I've complained about that all the time. But for me, better than most movies, I felt like the love interest character, in this case Annie, played by Michelle Williams, I thought she had far more narrative purpose than I've seen in a lot of comic book movies, frankly. And I thought it worked. Personally, I thought it was one of the things. And this is coming from a guy who is like one of the loudest guys who bitches and moans and complains about love interest in comic book movies. For me, in this one, it worked. But I'm sure it didn't for everybody. Clearly, Michael, it's one that didn't work for you, and I'm sure you're not alone, my friend. All right. I Am Blue writes, why does it take the Riot symbiote 6 months to travel across the world? Why doesn't Carlton Drake have security cameras? Tom was fun, but it's stupid. Well, I think, again, you're making a couple of big assumptions. Number one, if that little girl's got the Riot symbiote, then she can do a lot to get through any security and come in undetected. That, to me, is not a problem. That part's not a question. There's no ifs, ands, buts there. If that little kid's got the symbiote and that's Riot, then there's a lot of things Riot can do to very subtly sneak in undetected and be unseen. To me, that is not an issue. Not an issue at all. The stuff about the symbiote taking 6 months to travel across the world, I'm not going to lie to you, that's a question that went through my head as well. Now, I brought it up with my brother-in-law, and he said, well, it probably even just took him a while to figure out where he needed to go. All right, yeah. He took over that woman's body. He has no idea how does airlines, he has no way of getting on a plane or doing any sort of that. Okay. I mean, basically there are 100 different things that could explain why Riot didn't instantly just hop on a plane, make a beeline for San Francisco, and go right to the Life Foundation and right to Carlton Drake. There are probably 100 various explanations. It's just one of those things that the movie never felt that it needed to waste time with screen time on to make an explanation for. So I'm with you, I Am Blue. And the first time that said 6 months later and then Riot shows up, that went through my head. Just like, what's the story behind that? Why did it take him so long to get there? I guess the reality is there's 100 possible explanations. And the reality is the filmmakers never felt like it was worth taking up screen time to tell it, because ultimately it wasn't that important. It's not important why it took Riot 6 months to get to the USA. That's not the important thing. They could have come up with 100 different things to explain why Riot was still stuck there and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, did we need to take up 4 more minutes of screen time to explain it? Nah, it didn't help. It wouldn't have helped the movie. I don't think it hurt the movie in any way doing it that way. So I thought the exact same things, but the reality is it wasn't important. The little girl thing, though, I think is perfectly explained by the fact that that's Riot, and as such, a million different ways you could have got in undetected. Michael West writes, Venom and Riot, I could tell who was fight, who should, Venom and Riot, I could tell who was fight who should made Riot look different or have a different color. Venom and Riot, I could tell who was fight who should made Riot look different or have a different color. Well, if you could tell who was fighting who, then I don't think it's a big deal. Like I said, I've heard a couple of people mention that they kind of thought Riot should have been... I had no issue. But again, I'm only speaking from my own experience. That's all I can do is speak from my experience. And your experience may have been different from mine. But from my experience, I had no issue telling who was who in the fight. I thought it was pretty clear. But that's just me. That's just the way I saw it. Let's see. Ben Rayner writes... so I guess we've got our answer about Schnepp's source about Peter in this movie. Do you think he would have liked this? I think Schnepp would have loved this movie. I really do. I think it's the humor in it was the type of humor he usually would laugh his ass off at. And like I can tell you right now, he would have fallen out of his chair, laughing his guts out, with the whole pussy line. I mean, he just would have lost his shit at that. Yes, I, as a guy who sat and watched a lot of movies with Schnepp, I will tell you, I think Schnepp would have really liked this movie. I think he probably would have felt more, like, I don't know that it wouldn't have been one of his favorite movies, whatever, but he would have laughed a lot, and I think he would have come out having enjoyed it a hell of a lot. And I watched a lot of movies with John Schnepp. Maybe I'm wrong, possibly. But yeah, I never believed, again, I 100% believed that John Schnepp was told that Peter Parker was going to be in the movie and that Tom Hardy was going to be in the movie. Never had any doubt that that was true. But I also never had any doubt that his source was incorrect. I never had any doubt really that his source was incorrect. The only time that I began to wonder if it could be true was when it became clear that Sony was trying to hide the movie from the audience and hide the movie from the reviews. That's when I started to suspect, well, hey, if Peter's in it, that could explain that, but it wasn't the case. So, but yeah, there you go. We now know whether or not Schnepp's source was correct about the Tom Hardy thing or about the... a Tom Holland thing and about Peter Parker. It was definitely not correct. AFC writes, Hardy signed for 3 films. I'm not exactly sure that that's true, but anyway. Next is Carnage. 3rd film, maybe Spider-Man crossover. I think this Venom faces similar issues to Deadpool with crossovers to tonally different films. Well, no. I mean, they very specifically made Venom in such a way that you could cross Spider-Man over with it. I really don't think tonally there's any problem with crossing a Spider-Man movie over with this one. However, now that this movie's a success, I do not expect to see Sony take Spider-Man back. I now totally believe this is now a bona fide hit. This is a hit movie, $80 million, blowing away all previous expectations. Did way better than anybody thought it would. This now means Sony will leave Spider-Man in the MCU. I feel very confident about that. I mean, who knows? I'm not inside the Sony studios. I don't know for sure, but I feel pretty confident that Sony's going to stay there. So no, I do not think we're going to see Spider-Man in a third film. He's going to stay in the MCU. I believe, at any rate. Let's see. Venom, 0% chance of beating Riot. Dead 3 minutes later. Yes, but technically he lost to Riot. Venom lost that fight. And the only reason Riot left was because Riot thought that Venom was taken care of and that Eddie was dead. And he was. Had the big blade sticking through his chest. Done. Fight over. So Riot goes and gets in the rocket. So you see, Riot did win the fight. Venom lost. That 0% chance rating was absolutely true. Except Riot then didn't finish it off, went and gotten in the rocket, left himself vulnerable, and it opened himself up to that. But yeah, when Venom said we got no chance of one-on-one beating Riot in a fight, he was right, because Riot won that fight. Keep that in mind. Let's see. Paul Baranek writes, just saw the new Doctor Who premiere this morning. Can't wait for you to start the show, John. We all hope your new job is fun and fulfilling. Well, thanks so much, Paul. I appreciate that, man. Let's see. Where are we? Harris writes, on my planet, I am kind of a loser like you. Got the most laughs in my theater. Me and my friends had a great time and can't wait for a sequel. You know, it's funny. I was just talking about that, right? Like, somebody thought that line was odd, and I'm sure that there are people who thought the line was odd. But my theater, people laughed a lot at that line. And clearly, Harris, that was also an experience you had as well. A lot of people really worked for them. I thought it was a great line. James Welsh writes, with an $80 million debut, is it safe to say this movie will be profitable? Oh, automatic. Automatic, this movie's profitable. Do you see them now greenlighting a sequel soon? I said this a little bit earlier on. I expect we will hear about Venom going into at least development of Venom 2, at least maybe not into production, but going into development before Spider-Man Far From Home comes out. So I expect within the next 6 months, we're going to hear about Venom 2 getting a green light and then moving forward. Remember, they're going to start shooting Morbius in just a couple of weeks. They're going to be shooting Morbius in just a couple of weeks. And Venom may be in Morbius. I mean, I don't know at this point, so we'll have to kind of wait and see. Nikhil Shirsat writes, Avengers Infinity War in Hindi opened against Venom in India. Tough. That is tough. That is a tough go for Venom right there. Wow, that's bad timing. They probably should have thought of another date to open in India than opening on the same weekend as a Hindi version of Infinity War. That's probably not a very good move. Let's see. A big jump. Sorry, guys. Where are we here? All right. Factual opinion rights. And guys, I'm going to ask, if you have not sent in a question at this point, please do not send in any more questions. I only got a few minutes left here. I want to try to get through the remaining questions we have. So if you have not yet sent in a question, please do not send in any more questions. All right? Okay. Factual opinion rights. It still worked without the gore. I completely agree. Lots of violence, high body count, a couple of very brutal kills, guys getting their heads bitten off, one guy getting completely eaten. We didn't need to see the gory details for the effect to work. So I share your opinion on that factual opinion. John Hine, you want up? Well, why didn't you just say so? That was a great line. I really enjoyed that line a lot. Alex Deasy writes, quite gory for a PG-13. The R equivalent here in the UK of 15. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. When we found out that, number one, it got the PG-13 in the US, but in the UK, it got the same rating as Deadpool, which is a 15, your version of an R. I thought that was very interesting. And again, I can see this was a movie that really pushed the envelope and the boundaries of what was R material and what was a PG-13. And I think there's no greater testament to that than the fact that in the UK, it got the equivalent of an R. And here, it got a PG-13. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Alex Deasy writes, you think we'll get a sequel? Love the show. Thank you so much, man. And yes, I do. I think it's automatic at this point. With an $80 million opening weekend, the audience seems to be having a good time with it. I have very little to no doubt that this movie will be getting a sequel, and we're going to be hearing about it in the very, very near future. Samuel Phillip writes, John, you're the man. Well, thank you so much, Samuel. I appreciate that, dude. Martin Valuik writes, Sony's marketing team are idiots. Showed the last scene of the movie in the trailer again, and Venom looked more real in 2007 with a practical suit. Oh, I disagree. First of all, number one, it's not like they showed the final scene of the narrative in the trailer. It was a throwaway little tag-on scene at the end that they showed, so who cares? That was, to me, that wasn't a problem. If it was the final scene of the fight between Venom and Riot, that would have been a problem. But the final little throwaway scene of the thing with the mugger or the protection racket guy, nah, that's not a problem at all. That is not an issue. That is not a problem at all. At least not for me. And I thought Venom looked great, Martin. But again, it's all subjective. I could see, we're going to look at visual effects and feel the different ways. But I thought Venom looked great. I really do. I thought Venom looked great in this movie. But that's just my opinion. Absent Good writes, my favorite parts of the movie is anytime Venom is talking, absolutely. First act isn't bad, but it did get better when Venom and Eddie came together. I just wanted to hear Venom talk more because his voice was amazing. And it was Tom Hardy doing it. I did find, I've already talked about it, but I did find the first act quite bad. I thought the first act of the film was quite bad. Not the worst thing I've seen all year, not complete, utter rubbish, but it was botched. I felt the first act was botched, and I think this movie had the potential to be even better than it was had they executed it right. However, completely agree with you on the whole Venom and Eddie and Venom thing. When Venom and Eddie are interacting, every moment that Venom and Eddie are interacting was a moment that worked. And fortunately, this is a movie that spent a lot of time on Eddie and Venom interacting. And on that level, it sung, it worked, and I had a really good time with it when those things were happening. Unfortunately, had a very poor antagonist in Carlton Drake. Unfortunately, I feel like they botched the first act pretty badly. And if they probably lose a lot of people, then aren't able to get them back on board later. But yes, the Eddie and Venom stuff, that's when this movie sang. That's when it really sang. Tyler Yeats writes, love Venom. I have a real soft spot for him now. Yeah, and you know what? My wife knew nothing about Venom. She loves Venom now. Now my wife loves Venom. There's no better testament than that. An average film goer who knows nothing about this comic book character, she goes into the movie. She's read a lot of comic books, but she's never read anything about Venom before. So she goes into this movie completely clean, other than watching some trailers, and now she loves the character. Now she loves the character. That's a great testament to the film and what they did. Chris Rodriguez just sends in a super chat. Thank you so much, Chris. Music Lover 8594 writes, do you think Tom Hardy will do a sequel? Yes, I do think he will do a sequel. I think they'll come back to this. He clearly had a very good time making this movie. And I'm not going to guarantee, but I feel very, very good they're going to do a sequel to this, and Tom Hardy will do it. Ganesh Prabhu writes, Sony, I'm sorry about Venom. The only character I liked was Venom. I felt like they didn't put work into any other character. Well, I disagree with you. I think they did a lot of work on Eddie, unless you're kind of counting Eddie and Venom as one and the same thing, which I would totally understand if that's what you're doing. I also thought the Michelle Williams' character was great in Annie. I actually wouldn't have minded seeing more of Dan, her boyfriend. I like the character, but they gave us so little of him. Hard to say. They didn't do much with Carlton. The girl that John Raffiot's sister from Parks and Rec, the scientist woman who goes and gets Eddie Brock to help her, they really stayed very, very surface level with her. They could have done much more with her. But I think I'll disagree with you on the sense, not too much, because I think they did blow a lot of it. But I thought they did great work with Eddie, and I thought they did great work with the Annie character played by Michelle Williams. So I thought those two worked quite well. Let's see. Kyle Beckworth writes, going into the movie, hoping to see Spider-Man and being connected to the MCU, enjoyed the movie and had a realization not everything needs connection. Thank you, Kyle. Yes. Not every damn movie needs to be connected to some big giant cinematic universe. It's okay to have great standalone single movies. And sure, they're going to turn Venom into a cinematic universe of some sorts. No doubt we got Morbius coming. but they approached this movie like a single standalone movie. They executed the movie like a single standalone movie, and it works as a single standalone movie. And I'm so glad you said that, Kyle. I really appreciate your comment there. All right. Victor Watson writes, I watched it yesterday after I got off working yesterday. I thought it was good, and the people in the theater was laughing. I mean, hey, what else can you ask for? Was it Black Panther? No. Was it Spider-Man Homecoming? No. Was it Avengers Infinity War or Logan or anything like that? No. But it was still good. It was entertaining, and I had fun. And I want to go back and see these characters on screen together some more. I want to see more of it. And at the end of the day, that's really all you can ask for. So yeah, I'm with you, Victor. I'm with you. Nuno Besnis writes, when Ron Jones left Luke Cage, he said he was going to San Francisco. Just a coincidence or an Easter egg? You know, it's funny. We talked about that on the John Campea show a couple of months back. Total coincidence. Or maybe the writers of This Is Us just decided to throw that in there as a little fun little wink. So no, completely not connected, but there is a possibility that the writers of This Is Us might have thrown that in there just for fun. I would love to find out they did that just for fun, because that's really a cool little thing if that's the case. Let's see. Michael Soleric writes, overall, I liked the film. Not perfect, but it was fun. First act dragged on, absolutely. Still wish we got an actual Spider-Man versus Venom film, but this was fun. You know what? And at the end of the day, I am glad there was no Spider-Man. I'll tell you that straight up. I myself am glad there was no Spider-Man. You can make standalone solo movies and make them work. Venom did not need Spider-Man to work. He didn't need Spider-Man to work. And I completely agree with you, Michael. Like the film, not perfect. First act dragged, all that kind of stuff. But I'll disagree with you about the Spider-Man stuff. I am personally very happy. This was not connected to the MCU. The MCU is already overcrowded as it is. And I was very happy there was no Spider-Man connection. For me, made my heart happy. Made my heart happy. I'll just say that. Nick Kaiser writes, this movie would have greatly benefited from an R. Way too many off-screen kills and throw people kills. Again, Nick, I mean, it's all a matter of personal taste. But to me, I don't see how any of that makes the movie better. And you know me, I love filthy. Like, bring on the filthy. I love the filthy. God, I love filthy. But, I mean, the stuff that they showed, had you just shown more gore just to make it R for the sake of it being R, I don't think that makes it a better movie. Again, it's all to personal taste. I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm just saying, for me as an individual viewer, I'm going to disagree with you. To me, that just showing that just for the sake of showing it doesn't improve the movie. So, since everything else in the movie fit into the PG-13 paradigm, why give up the PG-13 just to put in some extra stuff that for the most part does not improve the movie narratively in any way? So, I'm going to disagree. But you know what, Nick? You're not alone. I guarantee you're not alone. I know there are going to be people who agree with you on that, and that's perfectly fine. It's all subjective. But for my own personal sensibilities, for me, the impact of what Venom was doing, I still felt it, and I didn't need to see big splashes of blood hitting the concrete in order for me to get what's going on and understand the impact of it. I didn't need it. So to me, it wouldn't have made the movie any better. So you would have been getting an R rating and giving up the PG-13 for no reason whatsoever. So anyway, that's just my opinion on that, Nick, but I completely respect your point of view as well. Mr. Falcon writes, Woody's scene was absolute cringe in my opinion. Goddamn Ronald McDonald wig and fanboy pandering. Love the show, John. Keep up the fantastic work. Hey, look, seriously, Mr. Falcon, I'm on your side on this, but I think you and I are very much alone. Even people who did not like Venom, people who did not like this movie seem to love that post-credit scene. I'm with you. It was ridiculous. It didn't serve any narrative purpose. Nothing actually happened. And all was some big fan pattern going, there's gonna be carnage. Ooh, he said carnage. He's gonna become carnage. Like, but hey, everybody else loved it, and if you all loved it, that's great. I celebrate that. So me and Mr. Falcon will just stand in the corner here and go, that was dumb. That was dumb and pointless. They should have taken that out and put the Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse scene in there. Would have been way more effective, but whatever. We'll be on our own on that. Let's see. Roy L. writes, best part was the banter between Eddie and Venom. Oh, absolutely, Roy. No doubt. No doubt. That was the engine that made this movie run. You take that out, this movie's a mess. You take out that great dynamic between Eddie and Venom, there's not much left to this movie to keep it above water. If that doesn't work, this movie doesn't work. It's just that simple. And the only reason you're getting a whole bunch of us saying that we had a good time with it despite its flaws is because that did work. And so I agree with you. Matt Brown writes, UFC fighter Matt Brown? The characterization of Venom was the best part of the movie for me. The movie was stupid, but it had a Fast and Furious, dumb, fun vibe. Your show's the best. Well, thank you so much, Matt. And I think you can tell by all my commentary here so far that I'm in agreement with you. I think this movie worked because the most important parts of the engine ran smoothly. There were other parts that didn't work so well. There were other parts of the car. Maybe the steering wheel was stiff. Maybe the brakes were a little squeaky. Maybe the tires were a little bit flat. But the engine was running well, and that's the Venom characterization and the dynamic between Eddie and Venom. Because that was running well, the car worked. So I'm completely with you on that, Matt. Turbo Flan writes, the final battle was horrible. Fact. No, not fact. I thought it was pretty good. So, not fact. It may have been horrible for you, and that's cool. For me, it worked. I found it exciting. I thought it did some very creative things with Venom and Riot's powers. I thought it was pretty visceral, especially when Venom's on his back, like in an MMA move, trying to take his back, and then he pops the spikes and all that. I thought it was great. Seriously. Now, best fight scene of the year? No. But I thought it was great. I thought it worked very, very well. So it sucks that it didn't work for you, but it did work for a lot of us. So your fact line, throw it out the window, not fact. Let's see. Roy L. writes, is there a reason why it now says in association with Marvel instead of just Marvel? Just curious. I don't know. I think a lot of the X-Men stuff says that as well. I wouldn't read anything into it. The Marvel stuff comes up before every Fox movie, before everything. Yeah, so... And it is a Venom. Venom is a Marvel character, so... I really wouldn't read anything into it beyond that, personally. Valeria262 writes, the Eddie Venom dynamic didn't work for me. Three Stooges back and forth between them was so dumb. Well, you know what, Valeria? And there are other people it didn't work for. For a lot of us, surprisingly, it did work. But for you, it didn't. And I've got to imagine, like I'm saying, that's the heart of the movie. Because the Eddie and Venom dynamic works, the movie works. So I've got to assume that if that key most important thing didn't work for you, I've got to assume that you probably didn't enjoy the movie overall. Because I'll be honest with you, I can't even remotely imagine liking this movie if the Eddie and Venom dynamic did not work for me. If that Eddie and Venom dynamic did not work for me, there's no way I enjoy this movie. No way I can even come close to enjoying this movie. So if it didn't work for you, I'm going to have to take a big jump here and just assume that the movie itself didn't work for you so much, which is really too bad. But hey, all film's subjective. That's the way it works. I'm Upset writes, kind of warmed up to the Eminem Venom song. Look, I loved it in the context of the credits. The song for me worked great. When I heard the song for the first time outside of the context of the movie, meh. But then listening to the song as it was meant to be listened to in the context of the credits of the movie, having just watched the movie, then it worked for me. So it's always a tricky thing trying to enjoy something from a movie when you take it out of the context of the movie. It's always a little tricky, but I agree with you. I'm upset. All right. Valeria262 writes, movie wasn't bad, just wasn't good. Still art compared to The Predator. But pretty meh overall. Definitely better than The Predator. No doubts there. But again, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that, as we were talking before, the heart of this movie relies on the dynamic of Eddie and Venom working. And if that didn't work for you, Valeria, then there's no way the movie can work for you. I totally understand that, because I would be in the same boat. Fortunately for me, that dynamic did work. Therefore, I was able to enjoy the movie. Kari Neves writes, keep seeing critics say the movie is unintentionally funny. My impression is that it was intentionally funny. Marketing issue? Oh, yeah, I never... look, ding, pussy. That was clearly intentionally funny. On my planet, I'm a loser like you. That's clearly intentionally funny. I will disagree. Look, all film is subjective, but I will disagree with anybody who says the movie is unintentionally funny. To me, all the laughs in the movie were very clearly aimed to be laughs. This is a movie that, 1/3 took itself seriously, 2/3 didn't. And there are some people out there, understandably so, who were looking for a Venom movie just to be dark and serious. And there's nothing wrong with that. That movie could have worked. But it's this movie, and it did work. I mean, in my opinion, it worked at any rate. Not everybody agrees, and that's fine. But yeah, the whole notion that it was unintentionally funny, I disagree with that. To me, it was very intentional. And to me, it was very clear that it was very intentional. But that's just my interpretation of it. Valeria262 writes, agree about the rating R thing. Wouldn't make or break the movie. For every Logan and Deadpool, we have 100, Man-Thing, or Watchmen. Wasn't Watchmen rated R? I thought Watchmen was rated R. Oh, that's the point. I get it. Now I see what you're saying there. Yeah, I never felt through this movie needs to be rated R. Never felt it. Like, there were certainly moments that I thought you could do R-rated stuff here if you did this, this, and this. But would any of that actually add to the movie? Not really. So we're not really missing anything. That was just the way I saw it at any rate. All right, really overtime here. We're going to get through these last few questions, guys. Motorola writes, food, bad guy, bad guy. Great lines for me anyway. I love, that was the last scene in the movie. Like when the protection racket guy's back in the story, pulls the gun on the woman, and you just hear Venom, that guy? Eddie, that guy. Loved it. Which then I was really disappointed when Venom approaches him and says, look, if I ever see you around here again, I'm like, Venom's going to let him go? They just had this discussion that he can eat bad guys, and Eddie just confirmed to Venom, this is clearly a bad guy. And now Venom's going to let him go, and I felt my heart sank. But then Venom goes, on second thought, and then he eats him. So I was like very happy to see that, because I would have been really disappointed if after having this whole conversation about only eat bad guys, and Venom going, bad guy? And he goes, that's him. Yep, that guy. That guy's a bad guy. And he just let him go, I would have been very disappointed. But fortunately, they saved it by having Venom go, nah, on second thought, and then he eats the dude. I like that a lot. Howard D. writes, how did Riot survive those 6 months in one body? The body worked for him, apparently. My assumption is it was a body that did match, but she's not a strong host. Remember when Riot and Venom were fighting? And Venom was doing better than he thought he would because, as Riot says, you have a strong host. So the stronger the host, the more powerful the symbiote becomes. That's the way I interpreted it. So I assume that for him to spend 6 months in that old lady, that must have been a match, but a weak one. A weak one. Therefore, he still needed to find his perfect match, which I guess was going to be Carlton Drake. Michael West writes, I watched the Aquaman extended trailer. Now I see why James Wan is doing the Uncharted movie. True, but we'll talk about that another time. Today we're here to talk about Venom. Kari Neves writes, could have taken 6 months to get money for the ticket. True, true. However, the one flaw in that theory, Kari, is that, well, then why didn't you just go take over somebody else who had more money, right? To me, there are 100 other explanations, but just thinking it may have taken 6 months to get together the money, or I don't know, maybe he found the match in that woman. He's like, well, I got to stay in this woman because I'm surviving in this woman, and now I got to get the money together. Maybe, but then ultimately he didn't fly. He didn't fly there with a woman. He flew there in the little girl's body, right? So, I mean, a lot of questions there. All right, Chris Jackson writes, smart marketing move for Sony to make it PG-13. Yes, and again, I didn't know that for sure until seeing the movie, but then seeing the movie, realizing how much violence there was, how big the body count was, understanding this movie didn't need any additional stuff. It was perfectly good as an R, or as a PG-13. Victor Watson writes, I think word of mouth will give Venom legs. Next weekend, not much. I don't know. I mean, the fact of the matter is the critical response has been pretty negative. I mean, like I said, only 1 out of every 3 critics likes the movie. 2 out of every 3 don't like it. That's going to have an impact. Will word of mouth from the audience be enough to keep it from dropping like 70%? Because if it drops like 55% and can have like a $35 million second weekend, big win. Big win. If it drops down to like a $28 million second weekend, big loss. So we'll have to wait and see. All right, Philip Vaughn, this will be the last question. I saw Venom this afternoon. I was very impressed by the Venom-Eddie relationship. It was nice to see a dark comedy Marvel movie. And again, I think, Philip, you just kind of encapsulated why this movie does work for some of us. Doesn't work for everybody. Certainly doesn't work for everybody. That's clear. That's a given. But I think you just kind of captured the essence of it. It is the Eddie Venom, and that's what kind of been the theme of this whole spoiler review, right? It is the Eddie Venom relationship that's at the heart of it. That's why somebody like, I think it was Vanessa earlier, saying that didn't work for her, therefore the movie doesn't work. But if that relationship works for you, like it did for me, then the movie works. That's how key, that's how important, that's how central that element of this movie was to the entire motion picture, to the entire story. If that works, the movie will work. You know, I feel pretty confident about that. I think I can say to people who have not seen Venom yet, if you end up liking the relationship between Eddie and Venom, you're going to walk out having liked this movie. If you don't buy into the relationship between Eddie and Venom, you're probably not going to like this movie. And I think that's really what it comes down to for a lot of people, Philip. So I'm glad it worked for you. It worked for me. And apparently it worked for a lot of people. So let's see how it does on its second weekend. All right, guys, that will do it for this little open spoiler discussion and review about Venom. It's a movie that is not great, but certainly isn't the colossal failure that we were fearing it was going to be. Has a lot of entertainment value to it, and I think in the end works. And with an $80 million opening weekend, and you know we'll talk about this more on the John Campea show tomorrow. With an $80 million opening weekend, you know they are popping bottles over at Sony right now. And I believe that means Spider-Man is safe and sound over in the MCU. It's a win-win for everybody, including us, the fans. Anyway, guys, that will do it for me. Don't forget the John Campea show will be back tomorrow morning. Make sure you come back and join us then. That'll do it for me for now, guys. Thanks a lot for joining me. This has been a Venom spoiler review. My name's John Campea, and until my next video, bye-bye.